there's a documentary I did that was it was astronauts that had all been to space, kind of retelling their stories and their account of being in space. And it would be it was a documentary where you'd kind of have a Q&A, but in the middle of the episode, it would break into this storytelling of the person that's being interviewed, and they'd recount, 10 to 15 minutes of their experience in space. But then there was sound design and a score that had been put together to accompany it. So there's certain moments where there's like a big door locking, and there's this suction in space, and everything just kind of goes completely silent. And then that's when you kind of really get to play with the room around you. And hopefully, let's say, you shut your eyes and you can kind of picture being there.
Yeah. Hello and welcome to Pods Like Us. I'm Martin Quibell, known to my friends, such as these two in front of me, as Marv. This time I'm speaking to two actual friends who we've known each other on and off for longer than we're going to say on this show and admit to. All three of us were part of a music scene in this area that we're all originally from. And because of the work that mainly Kurt is doing, but also that Rob is doing as well, I thought it'd be nice to have a group of us together and discuss what we're all up to. And I'm using because it's Pods Like Us, I'm using the whole thing that so my guests are Kurt Martinez and Rob Huskinson. Hi guys, thanks for speaking with me today.
Hello, mate.
Hey, Marv. Yeah, man. It's good to be here.
Cool.
Yes, thank you for having us, mate.
Cool. So the reason that I'm giving for us getting together is a fantastic audio sort of documentary about, well, we'll get into that in a bit. But for the audio documentary, I Am Not Nicholas, the Atmos mix of the show was done, the Dolby Atmos mix was done by Kurt. So I thought it'd be interesting to look at that aspect of creating podcast and the whole use of Dolby Atmos with someone who is an expert at it. Kurt.
I don't know about
that. How did the job come to you then, Kurt?
Do you know, I was doing a lot for Audible when they first launched Atmos. So they first launched Atmos with about 40 titles, and I'd done maybe 4 or 5 titles that released on that day. So it started with I was doing a musical. So I was hired to do a musical purely because of what I do in terms of, working in Atmos for music. Yeah. But I'd never done podcasting. I'd never done the sound effects side of things, dialogue, like what you'd consider as post-production. So I kind of had to relearn everything, like the music side. When it went into the songs, I kind of knew exactly what I was going to do, where things were going to go. But then, when it got to the actual dialogue and, like scenes being acted out, kind of had to rethink everything. And because it was Atmos, it hadn't been done yet. Audible hadn't launched in Atmos yet, so there was nothing I could use as reference material. So it became a case of almost everything in front of me was almost treated like a stage, if you like.
Yeah.
And then, certain characters would come in from certain sides and you'd kind of set them out on this stage. So they were like, as if, you shut your eyes and you could imagine that they were acting in front of you. They go into the songs and then it's kind of like exactly how I'd treat music. Fortunately, it went really well, and I kind of got booked on a few things afterwards that were all mainly, podcast things, documentaries that had sound design and storytelling kind of intertwined. And I did a lot of the sleep sounds things, so they're kind of like soundscapes that were, kind of made immersive. So the idea is you get some well-known actor kind of talking you through 5 minutes of kind of getting you into sleep, and then you've got about 20 minutes of a soundscape to kind of drift off to. So I did a few of these things, and then I started kind of doing a lot more music and almost didn't do any Atmos for Audible for probably well over a year. And then out of the blue, I got a call, and it was there's a documentary that's already in stereo. We want to reversion it into Atmos because there's a second series coming, and we'd like you to do the Atmos for for the second series. So I ended up basically doing these two series back to back. And then yeah, that was it. I was kind of back in with doing a bit of post and kind of relearning a few things again after like a year working on just music.
Well, it's interesting to listen to because we all know how Atmos works. How you've got sounds coming from all over around you, 360 degrees, essentially.
Yeah.
So when you're doing this, I remember that when I was engineering, it'd be the same for you both as well. Or when I'm doing a mix on something, I would sort of almost draw out or decide where in the mix I'm going to have each of the sounds. So what you're going to have to the left, or whatever variation of it, the stereo field, as we all know, it's old hat for all of us. This or that is. So, but when you're doing it with Atmos, are you doing much the same thing when you've got all these different sounds from all these areas? Are you pinpointing almost a sound map of where all these different sounds you want them to come from in the mix that comes into our ears?
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly that. So I kind of go as a rule of thumb. So anything that's like background sounds or general Atmos, so room tones or traffic sign, if it's a scene that's out on the street, I kind of do a thing that's called upmixing. So you basically take a stereo signal and then you kind of fire it out to all 12 speakers, and then it's getting a little bit of the same signal, so you kind of your ears perceive it as a full wraparound. And then that kind of leaves me open to isolated sounds like Foley or sound effects. I can then, if someone walks, from left to right, you do exactly what you do in stereo. But if they're going to walk, from the back of the room to the front of the room, you can do exactly that. So they kind of walk through the listener if you want. So yeah, there's a lot more pinpointing involved. And the idea is hopefully that when you shut your eyes, you can kind of pinpoint where those things are happening. If there's a documentary I did that was it was astronauts that had all been to space, kind of retelling their stories and their account of being in space. And it would be it was a documentary where you'd kind of have a Q&A, but in the middle of the episode, it would break into this storytelling of the person that's being interviewed, and they'd recount 10 to 15 minutes of their experience in space. But then there was sound design and a score that had been put together to accompany it. So there's certain moments where there's like a big door locking, and there's this suction in space and everything just kind of goes completely silent. And then that's when you kind of really get to play with the room around you. And hopefully, like I say, you shut your eyes and you can kind of picture being there.
Yeah, I think what's really important actually, when you're coming back from the background of like being an audio engineer, you've got nothing to reflect on in your space, because it's kind of like it's a little bit like going back and looking at what was happening with stereo and mono when stereo came in. They didn't kind of know what was going off in there, and there's all these quadraphonics and all these other things that's going off there. And then when actually you have to do a little bit of looking backwards to think about looking forwards again and seeing what's like, just like I think what you said something like, which I really loved was, you have to sort of, what's the rule of thumb? We've got to kind of follow the rule of thumb, because there's going to be some expectations, isn't there, as a listener? There's and from the audio format, there's some expectations that are just standards, but then also we're trying to be creative and immersive and really set the scene for the person that's listening to have that experience of being there, and that immersive experience is a really rich experience, and really that's what people are taking away from things like that. So what's really interesting, I was just to, sorry to interject, but when you're talking about spoken word, that's a whole new space, isn't it? So you kind of have to go back into what's it like when you go and watch a live show, or you do like live interviews, and where are people laid out and how does that play out? And then, so I imagine there's a lot of research and sort of like going back onto things in terms of what are the standards to see how you can actually recapitulate it, but within the immersive audio space, and how it translates, I imagine. Yeah, exactly. There's the idea of podcasts have been kind of knocked around a bit. So Atmos has been around for like 12, 13, 14 years now in cinema. So it's only, I think we're maybe like 5 years in terms of music. And then podcast was kind of a little bit later than that. So we knew what we were doing in music, and then there was this idea that you're going to get podcasts in Atmos. In my head, a podcast is, a
couple of people sat talking in a room, and I'm like, why would you want, like the three of us chatting now, like, why would you want to mic up, a whole room so you can kind of picture us three chatting? But then when I really got into it and I started to understand where podcasts were going in terms of storytelling and, these documentaries that are working well in it, your scripted audio dramas, essentially it's basically TV without visual. So you're almost kind of having to do an extra level of work where you've got that visual in mind and you're watching someone on screen. So you've kind of got the cue for like, oh, right, well, that's happening there. So clearly, it's got to happen at this part of, in this section of your peripheral vision, if you like, your ears. But you're having to almost shut your eyes and kind of mix in a way that's like, right, well, I'm going to move this to this section and then this is going to happen over here. There's a lot more going on.
Yeah. And I'm sure as well, there's always that reflection of like, is this right? You're always sort of in your head, like going, oh man, I think if there's anything that I learned about, there was a really great meme. You've probably seen it because I know us three have been in that sort of like tech world, and my background's like in audio engineering, as we know. But there's a really great meme, and there's a picture of like a skeleton. He's hanging over like a Neve desk, and there's webs hanging off him. It's like, the mix is nearly finished, and you kind of keep going back and reworking things. But actually, in a professional environment like you're working though, you haven't got time to keep doing that. So there's got to be like a very clear cut process, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly. And you've kind of, as your deadlines go, if you're working with your big companies like your Audibles and your BBCs, they've got really hard deadlines and there's no movement at all. So it's kind of like, look, you've got to do this, but you've only got, let's say, 5 days to do it in, and it's got to be delivered, end of day Friday. So then I've kind of got to manage my time, but then it means I've kind of got a list of where I want to be at the end of each day. And then on that Friday, it's just a case of me listening through, but I've got to be hands off and kind of go, right, all I'm doing is listening. And that's that. If I start going in and tweaking, then I'm going to spend the whole day tweaking, and then, it pushes the delivery back. So it's kind of, this is it now. One last listen and send.
I think
so. Are you
go on, Marv, go on.
I was going to say. So, are you imagining then where things are in the room of where people are, and it kind of it changes project to project. So there's certain things where like if it's an audio drama, then I kind of go with that rule of nothing really comes past where I am at the desk, and it's a stage setting. The rears are reserved for Atmos sounds, reverbs, kind of world building, if you like. But the front is very much where your performers are. And in most cases, the score is kind of like the most of it's happening around here. But then again, like there might be little things happening in the rears, reverbs and things just to get to fill that space. With the documentaries, it's very much, you're not doing that sort of, you've not got performers. It's pretty much people recounting stories. So in some cases, it might be, just to play with the format, it might be that, the interviewer's on the left, the person being interviewed on the right, those sorts of things, rather than just being straight down the middle. In TV and film, typically your dialogue will always be in the center channel. With this, because, people listen on Audible, probably 99% of people listening to anything on Audible are listening on headphones on a commute. So it makes sense to kind of use the stereo field. But yeah, with documentaries, it's kind of case by case. So it depends what's happening. And then I kind of have to go by that rule of, is it going to stay here? Or is it something that kind of warrants being spread more into the room to kind of feel more immersive?
Yeah, the format really matters, I imagine. You've got to think about what the end user's listening on.
Yeah, but you've also got to think, my rule in music is it's got to serve the song before the format. So I don't like doing anything gimmicky or anything that draws your attention for the wrong reasons. Yeah. And that kind of stays true in podcasts and audio dramas as well. There's got to be a reason for it. So I did a series called Zeros with BBC and Audible probably a couple of years ago now. And the way we were stemming things out was there'd be like a gunshot, and let's say the gunshot's way off to the back right, so the person shooting's over here, but then the bullet actually hits something over here. And it's those moments where you kind of get to split things out and really play. But it's when you get those files and you're going through, you're kind of making notes, but right, this will make sense if this goes here. You wouldn't put the gunfire and the bullet hit in the same place. It's kind of got to be sort of a sort of thing.
Are you receiving any show flows, as it were? So like, are they saying that this is, almost like if I was in theatre, I might have some notes about when certain things are happening, or do you receive anything like that when you get hold of
Rush Hour, when I did the musical, I had all the scripts for that and basically all the stage directions. And it helped because, like I say, it was one of the first Atmos podcasts that was going out. Listening back, I've not listened for a while. I would imagine if I went back in now, there's like things that I would do completely differently. Yeah. But reading through and being able to make those notes and go, right, well, this person comes in, from stage left. And it's like, it kind of paints the scene for you. So then I've got a better vision of, right, this is what it needs to be. I then send it on to, whether it's the director, the exec producer, and hopefully then if I've followed it correctly, they should be getting exactly what's written on the page. And then they'll have their notes from there where they'll kind of, actually, maybe it makes more sense if we tried this. And then it becomes that back and forth until we get it right.
That's sort of interesting with like a murder mystery, if you think about it, because then if you've got a gunshot in a murder mystery or someone's being killed, and then having read the script, that, we know that this is what happened because we know that the gun was shot from there, like you were saying earlier, in a sense. Yeah. You know that the gun was shot from over there and the victim is there. And so where to place the gunshot being fired from and the trajectory of it to be able to get that journey of the bullet absolutely perfect to tell the story. Because then towards the end, if somebody's minded that way, they might get to the end and think, yeah, that's how I remember it in my ears, was the bullet was traveling from there and to there. It's really clever.
There was, I don't remember which project it was, but I was sent some stems where something was reversed and it made no sense. So whatever was happening, let's say on the left, the next moment was supposed to happen over here, and it didn't. It was kind of all grouped together. And because I received stereo files, I worked through it, I'm like, well, this has all been signed off, so surely this is right. But then in my head, I'm like, no, I'm picturing this all wrong. So then I had to make the call to kind of make those changes and then run it by, when I'm sending everything, I'm like, look, I've just picked up on this, and this. Check this is all right. Fortunately, I had got it, but you don't want then the listener going through and hearing that, when everything's been signed off and it's gone out. You don't want a listener going through, hang on a minute.
That's important part of that quality assurance, though, isn't it? It's every step in the chain. Like someone might be writing that out, and they don't know anything about mixing in Atmos. Let's put it that way, and they don't know how it's actually going to functionally work. So it's always worth that bi-directional relationship, isn't it? Like sitting down, let's figure it out, and actually let's talk about it, because that's usually going to result in something that's better than just sort of going, I'll do what you say. Then it's like when you watch it back, it's like, what?
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, if we pull back and go into your history, then, so this is trying to condense. This is going to be a job and a half for all of us, I think. So, what was the journey then from being like the musician and you guys being in Black Box Diaries together? There you go, got the name in, and then going into studio engineering, and then, I mean, to my mind, going from a stereo mix used to be a pain sometimes, as it was, as we've sort of hinted at, with that joke of the skeleton there at the and that joke, we will get this mix done eventually. It must be mind blowing then for them to go from that, learning how to do engineering from a stereo field, to the whole Atmos thing, and surround. That must have been a big thing.
Yeah, it's God, how long have we got? So I first heard Atmos. I was working after uni and everything. I moved back down to London to try and find work in studios, and I just couldn't find the work at all. That I've kind of found now that I've been in it long enough, that music studios don't tend to advertise jobs, and it's kind of a, getting in at the right time or knowing people. but post-production studios do advertise. So I managed to get a job as a runner, and the studio I was working at, they were just putting in an Atmos studio purely to do adverts for cinemas in Atmos. So it's literally, 20, 30-second ads that go out, when you sit down before the trailers come on, and it's these adverts that are going out in cinemas. So my first experience of Atmos was a Guinness advert, I think. And we, it gets to end of day Friday, we'd go and have a few drinks in the studio and watch adverts because that's all we've got in Atmos. But, we're looking around like, oh my God, the can's cracking here, there's stuff fizzing here. And it's like, it was absolutely mind blowing. But, then a few years later, when I did eventually get to work in studios and I was working as an assistant and then an engineer, there was always rumblings that some labels were looking at Atmos for music. And then, those that were familiar with it kind of like, well, it makes no sense. How are we going to make, a surround work in headphones? It couldn't get my head around it. And then it was coming out of COVID. I was working at a studio in Acton, and they were the third studio in London to adopt Atmos as a format. So I got trained up there and got to really listen to what, at the time there wasn't a great deal of music available, but we got to listen to what was available. And some of it was like incredible. To hear Rocket Man for the first time, I mean, I've heard that thing millions of times now, but to hear it for the first time in Atmos and to hear moments that I'd never noticed in the stereo before, that was really eye-opening. And I was just sold on it straight away. I'm like, I love this format. And if there's things that I can do to kind of enhance, what I'm working on, then I'm all here for it. Like I want to learn it. And so, yeah, I got a job. I think the company that built that room put an article out, named the engineers that were working from there. And I'd applied to Dean Street years ago looking for engineering work. And I got a call and I was pretty much offered a job there and then because I was working in Atmos. So I went to Dean Street and I headed up Atmos there for about 3.5, 4 years. So there was a good chunk of that was kind of trial and error, figuring out what worked and what didn't. Like I say, for me, it's a case of I don't like gimmicky things. Some of my favorite records are available in Atmos now, and there's guitars flying around the room and things that make no sense to me. Like for me, guitars are very much a static thing. Find the place, leave them there. Synths of kind of pads in particular, there's almost like this nice movement to them that works to kind of crawl the space. But guitars and drums and things that kind of just need to be in position. So yeah, there's a lot of trial and error and figuring things out. And and 4 years on, we kind of made the decision. We moved further south, and I was like, I want to carry on doing what I'm doing. But the commute, we moved closer to my wife's family when we had the baby. I was like, I want to carry on doing what I'm doing, but the commute into London is 2 hours door to door, and it's just not sustainable. So I ended up building this and going freelance. So I still do what I was doing, but I just do it on my own now. 3 seconds from the house.
Nice. I mean, but other than the work that you're doing for podcasting, the work that you did, I'm going to say a name now. The Kylie that you did, the work there, that's a nice sort of way to look at how you're describing the music side of it, where instead of trying to make it a gimmick, in a sense, you're using it in a nice way on the mixes that you did for Kylie's album, where you've got like reverberation coming from that area at the back of you and around. You're using it for that sort of thing as well, and some of the pads as well you've got further back in areas. So it's a nicer, more comfortable listen that works for the music that way, as opposed to it being a gimmick. I think that is a really nice mix.
Oh, cheers, man. Thank you. It's that was a lot of fun to do. but it was also, when you get told it's Kylie and she's got this massive following anyway, this huge history, and then I'm like, oh shit, this again. I then don't want that to be someone's first listen of Atmos, to first hear that format and then dismiss it straight away. They go and listen to this artist and then they just kind of dismiss the format. So I say trial and error. There was a lot of I don't think I had long on that album. It was maybe 3 weeks tops between doing the first single and then delivering, I think the album's like maybe 12, 13 tracks. So it was a case of sort of setting out, right, well, I need these ones kind of in a good place by the end of the day. And then at the time, because I was still at Dean Street, I was traveling in from Essex at the time. So I was taking the Apple AirPods Max and I was just taking those on the train. And I was just listening constantly. So I was doing what I was doing in the studio, checking things back on headphones in the studio. But then when I was leaving, I was listening as you would do as a commuter on a train, in normal situations, putting it on, I've got a little Sonos you can see behind me. I used to have that in my living room.
Yeah.
So I put that on while I was doing the cleaning and stuff, and just anything that drew my attention for the wrong reason, that was the thing that got addressed the next day in the studio. So yeah, I think, touch wood, it came out all right. I listened back, so I got some new headphones the other day that have they've 714. They've got fronts, rears, and harness like actually in the cones. And I ended up going back and listening to that Kylie record, and I was quite happy.
Yeah,
it's nice. It's held up pretty well. I don't think there's much that's changed or much that I would change, if I had to do it again now.
Got any questions, Rob, from that?
No, not at all. I think it's been a massive success, and I think that Kurt would be the first person to really understate himself over the last few years, and in terms of the development of not only being someone at the forefront of Atmos and actually being a person to represent not only what Atmos does, but also the music industry just as a whole, and seeing how Kurt's been working with different universities and colleges up and down the country to go and do guest talks, guest speakers. We know it's something that the future's got in terms of its innovations and areas to grow. There's loads of opportunities, and it's still a young format. Although it's still a little bit like, and I'm sure that all these things, it's a little bit like, were you on Betamax or cassette? Do you know what I mean? It's one of those things that, or I'm showing my age a little bit there, but or like, is it Blu-ray or is it DVD? It's formats are always going to be ever changing, ever evolving. And I think what everyone finds is that you can't just stick to one thing for the longest amount of time. You've always got to be looking and keeping abreast of what's going off in the industry, looking at what partners are doing, looking backwards and looking at grassroots and seeing what they're doing. And then sort of transitioning your practices as much as you can and diversifying them through. And I think Kurt's been has been a really clear role model for that in terms of his career and what he's done in terms of his his repertoire, as it were. So it's always a massive pleasure to come back and spend some time together. But yeah,
cheers, mate. Appreciate that.
So when you're doing your own work, Rob, lecturing in music, is there anything that you've got from your friendship and your knowledge of what Kurt that you've used in that lecturing? Has that become part of the curriculum, so to speak?
Yeah, so I think something for me that's always been important for me anyway, I can't say this is for anyone or any company that I represent or work with, but something for me is always to make sure that we're looking at both ends of those spectrums. And it's a little bit like I was saying earlier, is we've got to stay connected to the grassroots and support people with the opportunities and the skills and the things that we have, because we've got the experience, but also be looking at the next step and making sure that we're passing on through into the industry, and that we're looking and speaking to the industry to inform what we do back at grassroots again, if that makes sense. Yeah. So it's a triangulation between those things, as it were. And so for me, it's always been important to keep connected with people that have really made it, my alumni from college and people that are actually doing things active in industry. I always say to my students, the difference between you and the people that you're watching as the people that you are massive fans of is the fact that they've just got the right place, right time, they've done the work, they've been out there, and they're not just sitting in their bedrooms doing nothing with the amazing songs that they're making and sitting them on their hard drive. They're getting connected and they're getting out there. That's the only difference. They're just people like you and me, and you can do it. And so Kurt has been down to the college that I was working at and did a really nice guest lecture for us, which was right at the end of the year, just to make sure that students were getting an exploration into the world of working in industry, but also like looking at Dolby and actually looking at how someone's career can diversify over the start and through to where you are actually active and working in industry. Kurt did help me out with some PowerPoint information the other week. He was talking about like time management, because I'm trying to train, you got to remember that I'm sure that it's been a long time since we were all 16, but when you were 16, like, could you even remember like what you wanted to eat for breakfast or things like that? So it's like, okay, you'd be 16 again. Like, where are you thinking of your future? No, you weren't. So it's, let's look at how we can connect those things back and talk about time management. This is what's happening in a professional job. This is the expectation that's going to go off there. So let's actually talk about it and think about how we can help and support you guys with that now, so that employers have got that in place. So you go and you just smash it, rather than, we know that it's big news in papers all at the minute that employers are turning around and saying, we've got students coming and they haven't got the skills and blah, blah, blah. And Andy Burnham's just this week gone out and said, we're going to offer technical qualifications to 14-year-olds now. And so, I think that the big thing is making sure that we look at the employer base first. And then as a teacher, then I might be looking at how I can design my curriculum to speak to that. So because I work with a really flexible and adaptive method. So basically, we've got different types of qualifications. So you've heard of like A-levels or diplomas. But then you've also got different awarding bodies, and different awarding bodies work in different ways. Now, I work for one particular awarding body that is a creative-only specialist. So it means that I do have the control over how I can develop the curriculum and design things for them. Other types of awarding bodies, students are pretty standardized in an approach. My argument almost is that in music industry, you have to kind of stand out. If you want to be an artist, you've got to be niche. You've got to have something that people are coming to you for. So what I've been really looking at is like, let's look at the local area. Let's look at the industry needs. What's going off? What are the guitar tutors doing? What are the events that are going off? How can we design something now as a mode of delivery that I can get students to go to that event and smash it? So they can be working in that event, for example. So now I've got work-based or project-based learning going off in my classroom, rather than, okay, well, we're going to write a report, or you need to do some research on 1960s quadraphonics or something like that, or let's talk about the human ear. Those things are super duper important, but we know that the skills and the attributes that young people develop, which are, how they can solve problems, how they can contextualize things and actually reflect and think about what the next steps are. Those are the kind of things. Yeah, being practically good is also incredible, but they've got to be reflective practitioners and be able to set the intention to make the next steps. Otherwise, they end up, like most musicians sadly do, go to working in Tesco or in a factory job or for the Royal Mail or something like that, which is not what they're actually really geared towards doing. They're just doing it to pay the bills, and they're getting bogged down. And so that it's a more sustainable model when we look at actually looking at the employability world, what's going off in the employer base, and then actually what we're delivering in vocational study. So I've probably gone way off your tangent in there, because it's something that I'm really quite passionate and love about. But I think that where speaking to people like Kurt comes in is actually connecting the root and the branch of everyone, and saying that here we've got students that are coming in right into industry. They've got these fresh ideas. They are the future. They are the future, and we need the next big thing, guys. That's the thing. We do need this to be sustainable and carry on. So if we can get someone like Kurt to come in, or I can use some of Kurt's material as a case study. Kurt will know this, but I've been giving his CV out for years as part of like CV building workshops. And look, this is what a creative CV actually really looks like, guys, rather than it just being a one-page document that says qualifications and things. that has nothing about you on there. We want this to look creative and speak to the people that you want to employ here. So yeah, it's been a real good gift to me to have the connection that Kurt's done. And just like I said, like with my students, like I've always believed in what Kurt's done. So, I don't think that he, like I said, he won't give himself the credit, but the risks that have to be taken to actually have an active career in industry are massive. And I'm sure Kurt's felt them at times. What would you say to that?
Yeah, just a bit. I remember we had a moment. It was probably about this time last year. I've taken a few risks with like moving to London and not, I moved to London without a job. Basically, used my savings to get a flat originally. Sold my car. Came down. I think I got a lease for like 3 months, and I kind of had to find a job, within that 3 months. I basically did the same again when I moved on from Dean Street and built this. It was like I kind of got enough set aside to sort of pay me for 3 months, and then coming towards the end of that 3 months, I was like, I don't know, I'm going to pay the mortgage.
Yeah,
and it got dicey. It was always going to be dicey those first few months going off on my own. Fortunately, one job came in, and that's it. My head was focused, like for the next couple of weeks. And then the next job came in, and then, there wasn't enough time to worry, which was probably did me a favor, but it kept me busy, and then things kind of snowballed from there. But the amount of times I've kind of been in that situation where I'm like, oh shit, is this right?
Yeah.
What next? Am I doing the right thing?
And you're always kind of like, you're working in what you're doing, but then you're also having to work on it as well. So you kind of like, you've got your 9 to 5, and then you're 5 to 9 almost, which is like, I've got to show up and do the work, and then I've got to work on myself in the evening or what I'm doing. Yeah,
well, it's exactly what we were talking about the other week with, the time split of how much time you spend actually doing the work, and then how much time you're actually out there grafting to try and find the work, and then maintaining these relationships, and the admin side of things. And, it's one of those where I can work on a single that's like, let's say a single's done in a day, and then that's like, well, then you've got 4 days left in the week to what are you doing? Just sitting around? No, I'm not sitting around doing nothing.
You mean you're not on a beach like this, just like with your laptop, just like, I'm a 6-figure coach, guys.
It's like there's a lot going on where you're just emailing constantly. Even if it's setting up going for a coffee for like an hour, then hopefully that leads to something else. It might not be immediately, but 2 months down the line, you might get a call from that hour you've spent having a coffee with someone. It's there's constantly other things going on that aren't just being sat here playing with faders.
As something that I've learned really early on was that every communication that you have, every meeting that you have, every just meet and greet, those little smoozy events, as you are probably saying, smoozy. They usually transpire at some point to money or work, changing hands.
Yeah.
So if you go to those events and you see people and you get talking to people, and then if they like what you do, then people will go like, I know a guy. And it's like a little bit like you were saying a little bit earlier about studios. It's a close-knit network. And the reason why is because you've got to have a little bit of experience and trust. And that's the reason why they don't just open it out to anyone. Yeah. Whereas when you're working, I imagine, with the other businesses that are just production studios, it's a little bit more business oriented, and they are out there to try and get hold of, new people, as it were. So,
yeah, exactly.
But yeah.
But you both had these periods. I mean, we've already spoken about Kurt when he first went down to London, that he had those periods. And it's the whole risk-taking thing to get to that thing that is eventually right for you. And I mean, I know yourself, Rob, from history, that you've had moments yourself where you've sort of like gone there and you've taken a risk yourself, and that's what's led to where you are now. In a sense, it's caused that journey, but in a way, it's that risk taking. You need to do it in a sense to prove that you can get to that level that you're trying to reach.
Yeah, years ago, I remember going to a food festival. John Turose, the chef John Turose. His wife Lisa Faulkner. We did there was a bit of a meet and greet. She used to be in EastEnders, I think, years ago, and did a bit of a meet and greet, and got talking to her, and she said this to me, because she sort of like gave it all up and went and put all her eggs in one basket. And she said, you know, if you've got an opportunity to jump, you know, you should jump. And that always sort of like landed with me. And it was like, and it's not because of, it wasn't because of who she was, or, you know, because you do get a little bit of that sort of like superstar-y, like fandom sort of like bits, don't you? But it was actually just, it landed with me at the right time. And I think that what I've always learned, or what I've seemed to learn now, you know, I'm 40 years old, you know, I've been working in studios and music related career since I was like 18 or 19. And, you know, you've been playing guitar in your bed and falling asleep with it on your chest since you were 30, you know what I mean? Is that you've got to diversify. You have skills that other people don't, and people will pay for that, you know, and that's the way in which you have to sort of find work as you go along. I get quite bored, I'm going to be honest, with things sometimes, so I juggle a few careers. What I mean by that is just that repetition can be quite tiring of things. So, you know, as I'm getting older, and I'm a lot more detail oriented. You know, I like to make meetings and community happen. I like to get people grouping together. I think human connection is something that we're really losing in a world like right now, even though this is a wonderful way for us to connect. But actually, like, you talk about things in a room, like everyone walks away and feels great, you know, and we'll feel great too, you know. But at the same time, it's kind of like seeing that when we get people together, when we can have community, people don't know how to run events. You know, when you come back from the music industry, it's like from years and years and years ago, setting up like gigs at the festival hall in Kirkby. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's not that difficult to me to organize a gig or event, but someone else, like, we don't even know where to start. You know, like, where do I even book? You know, so it's like it's really it seems quite really straightforward, and then you can solve a lot of problems for people. So, like, just recently, like, I work for a community interest company, which is basically a dementia day service, and you know, I came in just to actually work on grants and actually help them with getting hold of monies to be able to continue service and actually develop and grow service. But actually what it grew into was the fact that I just saw all these like gaps, and actually, look, we're going to solve this, and we're going to make it something that really matters, because if we don't solve this too, then all these grants don't matter. So, okay, it's great that we've just got 20 grand funding from the National Lottery for a bus, but if we've got no one sit on that bus, then nothing's going to work for you guys. So now all of a sudden, you know, we've got iPads, we've got route planners, and, you know, kitting them out with digital integration, but also, you know, having the logistical stuff to back it all up. And, you know, coming from the music industry, those things are really quite simple. And education, you know, they're really quite, not simple, but they're the norms. Then you don't see how that like lands and transpires. And people say that, oh, but that's so different from like music. It's not. It's like, when you think about music, it's patterns and repetition and you know, guitars and sounds and connection, and that's all you're doing. You just turn it into a space or a different career, or the skills that you bring are very, very different. And I think that what you find as well, it's like Kurt will be able to speak a little bit more on this, but when you go into other people that are as passionate as you are as well, you know, things really blossom and really grow. I think that's what's incredible about working in places like London and stuff. So one of my jobs, you know, I do get out and about, and me and Kurt have met for a coffee once a few times over the last 10 years, just because I've been at a training event or something. But yeah, when you get down there, you see that people have got a lot more self-agency, and people are a lot more motivated, and there's more skills, there's more opportunities. But then we have to learn those experiences and then bring them back to where we live in our local area. And I think that's what really I get out of like working in those different areas there. And being able to diversify is, I think, something that's really, really critical for anyone that's going to go through the creative industries. And that's what, you know, I was speaking to a little bit earlier about students having skills and attributes. They've got to be able to get to a point, find the resistance, either solve that resistance or take another step and move on. And, you know, if they just go past, you know what it's like. You want to buy something and your credit card's in the other room on your phone, you just go, I'm not going to buy that now. You know, there's some resistance now. Do you know what I mean? So, you know, having that tenacity to actually solve problems and everything else is something that creative practitioners are really great at. And I think that's where we have these areas where we can bring certain things to different areas of business and stuff as we go along.
But the way that you both, you know, when you do the talking to students and the curriculum and the way that you look at this and the way that you present music to these people, to these students, it's something that touches me personally, that I'm really happy about, because one issue that I used to have was almost, we've all been there, you know, music class at school, where there's that sort of, it's old fashioned, and you've got that
brown
sort
elbow
of
pads,
you know, you've got the elbow pads and the
yeah.
tweed, you know, and all that. And what you're doing when you're talking to the students is you're making it current, because, like you said, all that stuff that's there, that is from the past, the old, you know, it's still important. You still need to train your ears. You still need to do all of these things and have that knowledge there that is historically in music. But you do that, and this has been I've spoken with a lot of people who teach music to people in schools and educational places, and I've said that I think to make it more interesting for pupils and students is to make it relevant to them now.
Yeah.
And in a way, when you do that, if you start from that and then you work backwards, in a sense, bringing in these necessary elements, like I've said, those, you know, the ear training and all these things, those elements, and the theory in a sense as well, then I think that's going to hit more with people learning music and learning basically learning these things, than the old-fashioned way of, oh, well, let's look at this piece by such and such a composer from the 19th century or something, which isn't relevant.
Well, I think there's two really important strands there, and just to try and try and speak to both of them, is that we are currently right now using podcasting to be able to have this discussion right now. Everything is music, right? So this right here is something that can be used. This is a format that we've got to be training people on, so that people like Kurt are mixing stuff for podcasts to be enjoyed, for us to be able to generate that material and utilize it. That's only one area. But at the same time, there is still room and space for that as well, though, Marv. There is still room and space where we are losing the arts, we're losing jazz, we're losing classical, we're losing the trumpet bands and all that other stuff, because that's a heritage thing. So we've got to celebrate all of the areas of the arts, and they all really matter. But I do hear what you're saying as well. Like we do songwriting lessons. We're talking about Dua Lipa, or I get them to write reviews and do them like Justin Hawkins's reaction videos on YouTube. You know what I mean? That's how they do the reviews. Or I get them coming off stage and they do like a hot debrief. So we're trying to make it industry relevant, but also relevant to them. If I turn around to them and say, look, guys, you're going to do a project on 1970s Beatles, you're going to do the Beatles anthology, and that's going to be your that could be amazing for some students, but it doesn't fit all of them. So the second that you start to do that, you've got an exclusive, let's say, not an inclusive curriculum model, where that's not going to work for everyone. Now, people have, and myself and Kurt, and probably yourself, Marv, you probably connected with something that was nothing to do with that area of music. What you loved about music, which sort of spoke to you, was either personalities or tones or sounds or emotions or feelings that came out of that piece of music, and it made you want to sort of learn a little bit more about it. And then as you went to test and try and play with it, you found something else, and then it became a bit of a journey. You know, I don't think I knew how to actually physically play it like a C major scale on my bass for years, you know, but I was playing it, I just didn't know it. And so it's worthwhile sort of like seeing how things click and connect and work for the individual, and then actually, you know, keep things going on forward. But I think what you were saying though is talking about, we have to have our learned experiences to inform our future steps. And so we do have to look back and understand what does a bass sound like? You know, us three right now, we all have our own idea about what a bass sounds like because of the music that we grew up with, the sounds that we were exposed to, the things that we've been influenced by as we've gone through, and that should be what that sounds like. Or, you know, what does an acoustic guitar sound like? And it's because, you know, I remember listening to a Dolly Parton record or something like that. You know, that's something I'm always trying to chase. And the music industry is one that actually we would look back so much at trying to find sounds and tones. And, you know, we revere about Neve compressors that were designed in the 70s. Do you know what I mean? And it's actually this brand new one over here. We've got to do quite a lot of selling to try and get behind it, or we've got to link it back to something that's got some heritage to try and make it so it's kind of revered. It's a really funny industry where we're trying to speak to humans at a human level. And then, you know, we're seeing all this AI material come out and AI charts and all these other things. It's got a purpose. It's fit for a purpose, but we've always got to try and tie back into, you know, how do we use and function with music on a day-to-day basis? And right now we're using this material through this mode of podcasting, and that's still an area of music to really speak to. I'm sorry to totally take over this conversation, but I'm like,
no,
it's something that's quite passionate.
It's something that's important to me as well. Yeah. So, I mean, what I was sort of hinting at as well, and something else I've thought about is that then when you look at the contemporary and what's going on in the industry now, and you've done that for so long in the tuition, I've said to educators before that is how then you do look back to the heritage, because then you can look at something like, I don't know, like a Dua Lipa, and you'll go, well, you know, Dua Lipa inspired by NXS and this from the 80s and the 90s. And then that was inspired by this, that was inspired by that. And that's how you bring the heritage in. So when you look at Black soul artists, for instance, you will go, oh, this is that. But if you go so far back, you've got James Brown, you've got this, you've got Motown and jazz.
Just to speak to something you're saying there, though, is that the actual skill that you're talking about there is research and contextualization and understanding. And these are the kind of things that we try and teach. It's actually, look, what did you listen to over the weekend? You could all probably tell me, like, I listen to X, Y, and Z. But you don't see that as being research. You don't see that as being something about learning and exposing yourself to new material or whatever. Or I say, you know, which bit do you think is the hardest bit of this? If you were going to play this on your guitar, which bit's the hardest bit? Could you point that out for me? And they go, there, this section here. And then I go, right, okay, well, if I show you, look, I'm going to cut this section out in Logic. I'm going to slow it down so it stays pitch perfect, but we're just going to slow it down. And I'm going to get you to just let's find those notes. Can you find them? You know, let's just do a little bit of pitch correction, you know, see how things go. Yeah. Right, try those notes out for me. You know, we've got C, we've got D, we've got E, F, etc. And then, okay, right, now we're just going to speed it up just a little bit. And let's just see if you can try and replay that riff. And then now all of a sudden we're playing with it. Do you see what I'm saying? It's skills and development, but we're playing with it. And they're the kind of things that where you as an educator, you know, when you're being educated, if I sat you down and said, you're going to write a research report about, you know, something that's completely irrelevant to you, like you were saying, Marv, you know, you've got no connection to that. I've got no self-agency. I'm not motivated to do that. But you probably have got the skills. We just need to box it into this whole new space here to actually show that off. So I'm sure that Kurt's done it many a time when purchasing very nice PMCs versus Neumann monitors.
For the research side, yeah.
Yeah,
no, exactly. To go back a bit there with the, just thinking about when I was in school and how formulaic, you know, those music lessons were and things. And it wasn't actually until, as much as I enjoyed it and I enjoyed writing, I enjoyed, you know, playing in bands with other people in the class, you know, like just putting things together. It wasn't until, I think we were on Logic 6 at the time, when it was back with eMagic, and to actually sit down and hit record or something. I'm a nerd for tech. Like I love tech. So to sit down and to be able to use a program that could record what I was playing, and I could listen back and I could edit and I could do things that I couldn't just do, you know, like by sitting and playing the guitar. That was really interesting to me. And I think it's that thing of, you know, we all learn very differently. But I think that's where I found my way of learning, you know, like if I'm really interested in it, I'm really passionate about it, that's it. I can fully go down that route and I can take it all in. If I'm not that passionate, then I kind of have to find my passion within it. You know what I mean? If I know it's important, I know I need to learn it. Like, but I need to get my head around, there's got to be something in here that makes me want to learn it. You know what I mean? And it's, So I think working in Logic did that for me. But then also, like, moving into university, I found people that were working in the real world coming in to kind of talk about their journey, not necessarily what they'd worked on, what they were doing, but like their journey from going from, be it education, you know, being straight out of school, whatever, and somehow getting into the industry in whichever part they were working in, working their way up. I found that really interesting because what you were saying earlier, Rob, like the idea that if if you can do it, then I can do it. You know, it's that kind of gave me purpose to sort of crack on and try and figure out, you know, well, this is where I want to go. This is what I want to do. And hearing those people's stories kind of fueled that fire a bit more than, you know, the brown elbow patches and I think, can we do some minimalist piano?
If I remember like going back like really early on, like having an old Iron Maiden record and like trying to draw Eddie off the front of one, or you know, like seeing Slash for a Marshall guitar ad with a Les Paul, or seeing Tom DeLonge holding his yellow Fender guitar like this in front of a car. You know, that was great, and I always aspired to be like that, but there's something missing. You know, there's a bit of a you and them when we put these big posters up and say, this is who you could be like, you know. Yeah. But when you've got that experience, that connection, like you say there, Kurt, it's like, actually, I can see myself in you, and I know I could do it. I could have a good go. But just to talk back to what you're saying there, the reason why you really love that learning is because you were able and you can do it. Yeah. And when you have that step-by-step process of like, oh, I can do this, that's really motivating. And then, but the second you go like, oh, I can't do this. The amount of times every year I have to go back into modes, and I'm like, right, where do I start? You know, I'm like, what's going on here? You know, and it's like I can do it, but there's like that wedge of resistance, as it were. So we have to try and take that away and actually just allow people to play and have that creativity.
Yeah, I'm very much I can read instructions over and over, and it just won't go in. Yeah. But if I'm shown how to do something, or if I watch a video, right, I've got it, and that's it, I'm off. Yeah. But if it's written down on a piece of paper, I can read that piece of paper over and over, and I don't get it.
It's the whole studio thing again, isn't it? I mean, we've all done it where we've been in studios, and you must still do it now when you're buying gear for your own studio, Kurt, where I remember each time I've been in and I've recorded, and there's a new piece of gear appeared at the studio, such as one of the highlights for me was, I mean, it's not even a piece of gear, it's an instrument. When I went to the old library studio and they had the new Moog appear there, and I could not take my hands off that thing. That was the instrument that day for the recording. Everything I recorded had to have that Moog on there, because it's that attraction that we have that you get from. There's almost a release in a sense with this, where you try this out, and then when you've suddenly thought, I know what I'm doing with this now, and it's not instruction manuals, it's having to hands-on go there and physically learn how to use this stuff. And it's the biggest high that you can get when suddenly you know what you're doing with this stuff.
Yeah. And that Moog, I've got a funny story about that Moog. So that Moog was purchased. We didn't purchase it for the library. It was purchased by the company that owns the library to make whale noises for a theatre production. And so, I mean, you're talking about Voyager keys and heads unit. You know, you're talking a very expensive synthesizer there. But yeah, and then we acquired it and we got it in. But yeah, again, there's the brand, the reputation of the brand, what it does. You've probably got some meaningful connection in another way with what Moog synths are, or you listen to another band and see how it's been used. And then when you plug it in, you're having that experience of listening and immersing yourself. And we can tie that right back into Atmos. It's it's that immersion of like, I'm just me and this instrument, and what can I do? And the amount of times, like we used to, at my old college that I worked at, we had production suites downstairs and little pods, and we called these pod units, were packed with synths and stuff. And, we'd find students in there at like 6 o'clock, and when we were like leaving, it's like, I let you in at 8:30, dude, when I got to work. Like, what have you been doing all day? It smells like Doritos in here. Like, what's going on? And they go like, whoa, I didn't even realize, man. Like, just been having so much fun, and the day's just gone. Same in the studio. We're just getting to RS1, and it's like recording the main recording studio. And it's just like you've done like a 3-hour session. It was just like you blinked, And the amount of times I've been asleep on the library floor, like, because it's like so late at night, like in the theatre, just going to have a lie down in the theatre after a late night. It was good space. It's
cool.
I always found with I've been fortunate in what I've done, that I've worked with labels book in the studios, but when the labels book in the studio, you don't have the luxury of, being able to play with the gear as much as you'd like. You kind of have to know it. It's like, artist's going to be here, in an hour. You've got to be set up. They want to use this mic, this, this chain. So it's kind of like a set up and go situation. And you've almost got to find, so like with the CO1B, I found the settings that I liked for one particular job. And then if I was setting up and it was just like everything was going to be rapid from then on, they'd be my go-to settings. And then I'd kind of tweak from there. You literally just changing the threshold and not really anything else. There's certain times when you've got a bigger band or tracking, then you've kind of, again, you've probably got less time, but it's more a case of, right, throw all this up through the pre's, get compressor settings quickly, and then again, it's just threshold on everything. But you kind of got to know in your head, this is what it's got to be. I haven't got time to play. I think that's one of the things I've missed I know some producers that have got their own spaces, and they'll have a band come in that's coming in for like a week to track, and they'll spend that first day just getting tones and sounds and getting things to sound the way that they want. And I think that'd be really cool to do, and to spend time. I mean, now I've got my own gear, it's great. I can spend as much time as I want doing what I want when I've got the time. But when I'm booked on, a studio session, it's literally, this person's coming in half an hour, this needs setting up. It's just, it's heavy.
Yeah, you have to learn the ways in which you're actually going to make it work for the situation, rather than, and that goes back to like really good time management, knowing your products, doing your research again. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And having that experience, you should be able to walk into a studio and be able to and use it and function within it.
Yeah. I would have, like, if I was booked on sessions, whether it was as an assistant or an engineer, you'd kind of get the chain sent through. And then I would, if it's something I've not seen before, I'd be downloading PDF. So I'd be on the tube or in a taxi on my way to the studio, and I'd be reading the manual to try and just gauge, right, well, as soon as I get in there, these settings, I know that worked on this thing before. I know that this kind of behaves like this thing. So we just set it up, and then we do a few, like, as we're doing those first few takes, just kind of like getting levels and things, then I'm just kind of sneakily playing around, figuring things out. And it's like, right, cool, we've got it. Okay, let's go for a take.
Can we just do that take again? I don't think you quite delivered it quite right there. And obviously, Kurt's in the background, like tweaking something still.
Yeah. Well, exactly. They when producers would come in, they would, if you're doing a vocal session, they'll have the track laid out. You might just get a stereo track, but then I'd be doing like my tempo mapping and my marking and things. I'll give them like 2 listens through. I'm like, oh, do you want to just get used to the speakers or whatever? And it's like, I'll play it through while they're listening. I'm literally doing my tempo mapping, marking. If I'm not done by the time that 3-minute song's done, well, cool, you just want to have another listen through, and then, I'll finish off while they're having that second listen. Just kind of doing these things sneakily without anyone realizing, but you are doing the session prep there and then in that moment. It's very, very fast.
Just don't tell anyone.
Yeah.
No. I mean, Rob talks about time management, and he talks about getting bored easily as well. I mean, Rob, not only have you got, this work that you do lecturing and the musical education and all this, you've also got this, and this is one reason why I've got you on the call, is because this is another side with my own family history and my mum passing away from Alzheimer's last year. And this sort of touches me as well in a way, and I want you to explain to people about this, because I think it's really important, is what this thing called Open Door is.
Open Door. So Open Door is a dementia day service. So it's a community group where people with early to mid onset dementia can come and get together and have a really great meal. Food's the one thing that connects lots of us and actually sort of de-stresses a lot of people. It's quite hard to argue over food, isn't it? And then we put on activities and stuff. My role there really is, it's like I say, it's to do with like getting all the grants and stuff. Like, I'm not in there like caring and doing stuff, but I do help organise with some of the carers events. So what we actually do is we actually get carers, people who are caring for someone with dementia, to give them a little bit of time and space. So my I get hold of some people to come talk at those events as well. So we might have like nationwide come and talk about money management, or I've got some friends that work in physiotherapy, and they'll come and talk about physiotherapy for keeping active and falls prevention and things like that. Or we do like nutrition workshops and things like that. So that's been really good. Dementia is a disease, and it is a disease, but it's one that's always declining. It always goes in one direction. It's not something you ever really sort of see anyone coming back from. So I think it's really important work. I think it's really undersold. I don't think we talk enough about that in terms of care across especially Nottinghamshire, just around here. There is support and it is out there, but getting more eyes on it is always the thing. So I think it just speaks to me as well. It's something that you can see what you do has a good impact to people in a lot of ways. It keeps you tied down and tied together with it. But yeah, no, there's not a moment to be bored, man. They're great people. If you ever go to the service, go and take a guitar for a bit, and then off you go. Wow, watch them get up and dance and sing, and you're playing like old MacDonald or something like that. It's really great fun. No, it's really good fun. They're always up for a really great laugh. But yeah, so that's been the case there. But no, time management is always difficult as well. I've just been diagnosed with ADHD owner. So like I think that's one thing that sort of adds and takes away. So it's definitely not a superpower. People say it's superpower, not at all. But I think it's one of those things where you sort of recognize things in a different way to other people. So the more that we can do to support and raise the awareness of things to do with cognitive development and cognitive decline and things like that, it's always going to be really good.
But the ADHD, watch what you're saying, Marv. The ADHD, it'd be sort of almost helpful in some ways with that, because it allows you to be able to focus in on those specific things that you need to do. In a way, there is that sort
I've had to learn how to do that,
yeah.
though. You know what I mean? It's one of those things that I've had to learn how, because I could sit in front of a computer, in front of Logic for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, picking tiny detail, and it didn't matter. It doesn't matter. And some things, like Kurt was saying a little bit about, like, there's no time for revising things, really. We've just got to make sure the project's done. And that was never on my radar. I just wanted to make things perfect. And that could be quite stressful. Yeah. But yeah, I know what you're saying. It's like you're picking up on things that other people aren't, which is incredible, really. That's why, I always say I'm a really good number 2. I'm not a good number 1. And I don't mean toilet there. I mean, when people are leading, I can support, and I'm a good side partner, as it were. Because it's usually like, okay, if you've got an idea and you know where we're going, keep me on track, and I'll do as much as I can, and we'll get there. But then at the same time, there's loads of skills and attributes that I bring to in other ways that I can help other people with that can't see some of those things, and why the small details don't matter. So.
But that's why it's been fun on the odd occasion when me and you have worked together in the studio, where I've enjoyed it in a sense, because me and you have got this thing where, and I saw it in you when we've been in the studio, where I'll be doing something and you've honed in on something musically that will work perfectly for it. And we both do it, where we will be there in the studio, someone's putting a part down, and it's because of that's in us, where we notice it, and we're like, do you know what this needs? Is that we can hear what needs doing exactly in that moment, and then we go into the studio, we do what it needs, and so it allows us in the musical world to be able to work that way.
Yeah, and I think, like Kurt will probably see it too. It's like once you get musicians together in a room, it's like the IQ in that room probably drops about 20 points. But at the same time, it's about like seeing creativity and knowing you're talking. Like you were saying about, once I've got the studio, I know how the studio side works. If you bring something to me, well, let's just make it amazing within this space, in this format, in this way. So yeah, and I think like music. When I work in music, when I work in sport, when I'm working in quality, when I'm working whatever, there's a process base to it. There's a goal at the end that we're getting there, but then there's also the processes that you're going through. I think that's something that, that process and seeing step by step where you're going, is really important for a mix. It's really important for learning to play an instrument. It's really important for, writing incredible reports, or, whatever it is that you're doing. It's sort of there's the same skill or attribute, but just, with a different compass, as it were.
Absolutely. Wow. I could talk with you guys for hours and hours and hours, but we all need to get on, don't we, with what we've got to do. Next time I'm in London, Kurt, because I was there for a podcast show in Islington in May.
Yeah.
I was there then, but because that's so full on, I didn't have the time to be able to connect with anybody or whatever. It'd be great to catch up, and I'll buy you coffee and lunch or something some point when I'm in London next, if that's okay. Yep.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. I've got access to a studio in Islington, so if you're down for that again,
nice.
I'll take you by the studio and play a few things if you like.
And me and Rob are closer to each other than London, so we can sort that out sometime soon.
That makes it a bit easier.
Also, I've got pictures of Black Box Diaries playing at Kirkby Festival Hall somewhere in my collection, by the way.
Chris, my brother was actually asking for some photos this morning, Marv. So if you've got them, shoot them across, man. Yeah.
I'll look through the archive and go through the storage and see if I can find them, dig them out.
Yeah.
Shout out to Chris.
Yeah. Man.
Anyway, thank you very much, guys. So how can people get in touch with you, and what have you got coming on, first of all, Kurt?
It's a good question. Just thinking what I've done and what's announced.
Season 2 of I Am Not Nicholas.
That's out as of last week, I think. So I was on holiday, and Nicholas Rossi, who the series is about, he died while I was on holiday, so we had to rush out a few changes to the last episode. The series was meant to go out. I think it still went out on the same date. But yeah, literally as I got back from my flight, I was straight in on reversioning episode 3. So that is all out now, I think. The new Alfie Duke single is out on Friday. I think the new Meek single is out on Friday. So they've been a lot of fun to work on. And then the Script new album is out in August. So that'll be the next main release. But yeah, it's busy.
Rob?
What have I got working on? Not much. I'm just about to go to a new employer, so I'll be working at a different college as of September. You should hit on my LinkedIn, maybe. Probably the best place to stay in touch with things on there. But nothing coming up. With education, it's a cycle. It's the same thing repeated for the last 20 years that I've been teaching. So it'll be a little bit different there. But yeah, so there's nothing really massively on the radar. What I'm really interested in at the moment is like coaching and seeing how education is going to be going in the future with a new sort of leader from the government. The sort of things that I'm keeping abreast of at the moment, and then also looking at just how to run really great training events. Really, I think that's what I'm digging into at the moment. So that's all from me, really.
Cool. Is LinkedIn the best place to find you as well, Kurt?
Yeah, LinkedIn, Instagram. They tend to get updated regularly with things going on, and I check my messages on both of those as well. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, guys. It's been fun speaking with you. Good catching up.
Awesome.
Nice one. Well, cheers for having us, mate.
Thanks, fun.
Right. You can find pods like us on any site that you find podcast, and the easiest way to find all the socials is to go to themarvzone.org. But anyway, thank you everyone for listening, and hope you listen again to another episode of Pods Like Us.